Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
June 2018, that's when I launched Fresh from the Farm Fungi. Culinary mushrooms are medicinal as far as just eating them. Every mushroom has beta-glucans, which are blood sugar modulators. Like I said, I got interested because of the entomopathogenic aspects of it, which that's a mushroom that eats insects. So it's pretty crazy. So I kind of took my passion from growing things and, having a garden all the time and my laboratory background, and I used those skills to tissue culture over 80 species of cannabis for one of the leading cultivators here in Colorado, Crispr-Cas9. It's a tool that is used to modify the genome very specifically. I remember this guy showing up at the door, and I had this basket of lion's mane, and he just grabbed one and ate it like an apple. So I was like, you're not supposed to do that. But at that moment in time, that was like when I realized, like, holy crap, there's like a market for this too. I think of them as like nature's vitamins. They're taking all these different substrates like wood, soil, all the debris that's fallen to the forest floor, and they're just condensing them into this tiny little fruiting body that looks delicious to people. So eating that is like eating a fruit that's highly nutritious. This is Gary with Fresh from the Farm Fungi, and you are listening to Airey Bros Radio.
And now that I think about it, now that we got you on, it'd be interesting to talk about too, with in terms of like dried mushrooms and stuff. Could you almost use a dried mushroom as like a breading, almost like an almond flour or something like that?
Yeah. I've never done that with veggies, but it's one of my preferred methods for steak. So I'll take a bunch of dried mushrooms, grind them up, put it on the outside as like a crust, and then I'll leave it on my countertop for about 2 hours, and it kind of soaks in, and then I'll cook it up like that, and it makes nice crispy outer layer. But I haven't thought about doing that as far as like, I think fried eggplants would be the same type of thing. But yeah, that's a really good idea, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, interesting. We're I mean, for me, Cordyceps has always been kind of my point of entry in terms of mushrooms and stuff, because I always looked at that as for athletic purposes and stuff. And it was recently, just within this last summer, that I've dabbled and started taking them in as for nutritional benefits, eating them. So I'd like to pick your brain about all that stuff and kind of hear about your journey. But I've been interested to take it on. I've been diving into a lot more podcasts specifically about nutritional benefits, and then I kind of went down this whole other Cordyceps rabbit hole that we kind of talked about at the stand the one day. But I dove more into it to try to understand that a little bit better in terms of the different styles and different kinds, and the caterpillar versus what you guys do and all that stuff. So
yeah so it's pretty much on the forefront as far as my mycology endeavor. I would say like Cordyceps is my hobby. The gourmet mushrooms are my full-time endeavor. So I've been growing them for about 2 years now. I went out to Telluride Mushroom Festival a couple summers ago, and I saw a lecture on Cordyceps, and I actually met Fresh Cap Tony. He's from Canada, and he's pretty big mushroom guru. Like, he is very big into like the mushroom powders and stuff. So I talked to him a little bit, and he kind of inspired me, along with Trad Cotter. He gave like a big keynote lecture, and part of it was on Cordyceps and the entomopathogenic fungi being utilized as a natural pesticide. So that is honestly like what I originally got invested into the Cordyceps. Was that summer we were growing some roses, and I don't know if you can see behind me, but I do a lot of gardening. So there was a Japanese beetle invasion that I grew up on the East Coast, and they have always been a problem out there. But apparently over the past few years, they've finally reached Colorado, and it's like a very beautiful beetle. So it's very colorful and it looks cool, but it devastates anything, roses, the buds from like our pumpkin plants. We had a bunch of like pepper plants, and even some of the hops plants back here. They will attach to that, and then they do their damage. And then they'll leap off into your lawn and kind of like chew the roots. Like the grubs will chew the roots on your lawn, so they do a lot of damage. And he gave this lecture about a woman in Pennsylvania that had some similar beetle damage to their grape vineyards, and they sent him in one of these beetles, and he kind of trained it to consume the beetle, and then apparently that created a natural pesticide, and it's helping to control the mitigation, or at least that's what the idea was of his whole talk, or part of the talk. And that sparked my interest. Then once I actually Googled Cordyceps, all these crazy health benefits popped up, and there's claims that it can help reduce like telomere damage on your DNA, which is incredible, which could help promote longevity in life. And then the cordycepin, which is produced by Cordyceps, that's an important molecule, which there's all these studies about the energy benefits. So it's very similar to ADP. So in the Krebs cycle, which all of your cells undergo the metabolism of the cell, utilizes ADP, and the cordycepin fits in there pretty closely. So it helps to, give you energy, and with very little consequences like caffeine or any of the other stimulants out there. So that was kind of like a secondary reason why I started growing them. And then, a lot of failures along the way. I try to do at least one batch a month, and I would say maybe 10 to 20% of those are successful. So it's a hard pill to swallow if you start growing cordyceps, but the upsides are tremendous. And this past spring, we bought a freeze dryer, and that was the first batch we ran on the freeze dryer was the cordyceps. So my thoughts were it's going to help to preserve those volatile compounds. And there is so much to be studied. I feel like it's the tip of the iceberg with the cordyceps and a lot of the other medicinal mushrooms for that matter. So that's kind of my story with cordyceps. And then I prefer to, make a tea out of them. So I have a bunch ground up in this little mushroom jar where I'll throw it in my coffee, or I'll just do water with cordyceps. And then someone a couple months ago sent me a video of someone that they would make the tea and then pour it in their eggs. So sometimes I do that, or I'll just eat the cordyceps at the end of the tea. And I've been taking them for probably over a year. Some days I I take a day off here and there, but I definitely noticed the difference between, you know, the days that I consume them and the days that I don't.
Yeah, I would say the first time I started taking them was in, I guess it goes all the way back to probably 2010 or 2011 was when I first heard about them with Shroom Tech Sport from On It Labs was making them, and then Four Sigma came along and they had some of their coffees and stuff. And then recently I've been buying the powders from, either people here locally, I got your stuff, or I was getting it from bulk supplements and making my own kind of concoction of capsule with sea moss and beetroot as well. And there's my kind of like pre-workout capsule that I've been experimenting with lately. But let's take it back a little bit even further. You said you're from the East Coast. We're East Coast guys too, so we definitely want to get into that a little bit. But where did your mycology journey, did it start on the East Coast, or how does this all tie in?
Yeah, so my journey began with, I guess I can go way back into college. So a long time ago, I was supposed to be a pre-med student at SUNY Geneseo. So that's like in the upstate New York. And I took a few semesters and realized, maybe that wasn't for me. I really enjoyed doing all the laboratory work though. So I shifted my profession into going into medical technology. So when I was taking medical technology, I did take a couple of years of mycology, but it was more like clinical mycology. So it mostly focused on pathogens and safety, as far as product safety, environmental safety, and what types of fungus could be pathogenic to the human body. But at the same time, I was learning like physiology. So I have a pretty broad understanding of the human body. And I ended up going into a program at the University of Buffalo, which that had the, MLS program. So there's the University of Buffalo and Roswell, which is really big into cancer treatment. So I really liked working in a lab, which I think that is kind of my strength, and my passion is like doing the lab work, the culture work and whatnot. But going back even further than that, I grew up in the country. So I've always had a garden, a vegetable garden. My uncle, he grows grapes. Like he has a ton of vineyards in Western New York. And then my grandpa, he always had a veggie garden. And then my family in Eden, we always had vegetable gardens. So I've always been really into just growing plants and vegetables. And I guess that kind of ties into my education. So when I graduated college, my wife and I, she was my girlfriend at the time, we took a road trip all across America. So we took a few weeks, and I had a Jeep Wrangler at the time, and we camped out at all these national parks, and we just really explored the country because we were looking for somewhere to settle down and start a family. And we really liked Oregon. There's like the green, luscious life. It reminded me a lot of New York. But then we also, when we came back around, we stayed in Glenwood Springs for a couple nights, and it was like paradise out there. We had never been around mountains really. So we fell in love with Colorado, and we put out like 20 applications, and it was just kind of lucky that they accepted our application for a job. So I worked at this place called Allosource in Centennial, and it was a biotech company. And then she got a job with Geico. So my wife works in insurance, and then we just relocated out here. So, we literally just packed up our car. We moved into this apartment that we never even saw. So we just took our chances and we're like, all right, we're going to start here. And I really liked working at this lab in Centennial. And we were procuring stem cells into different products. So I don't really know, like, I have to speak pretty broadly because some of the stuff is kind of patented, but basically we're making like little arteries out of stem cells. And my job was to procure those stem cells, and we did a little bit of quality control. And that, lasted for a couple of years. And then my supervisor took a position in California. So it really shifted my role as, what I was doing for that company. And then my wife and I, we got married. So it was just, a turning point, an inflection point in our life. And I decided to leave the clinical lab world. And I went, and that was right when cannabis became legal in Colorado. So I kind of took my passion from growing things and, having a garden all the time, and my laboratory background, and I used those skills to tissue culture over 80 species of cannabis for one of the leading cultivators here in Colorado. So that was a pretty big experience for me. It was a startup company, so I was one of the first employees, and rapidly this company grew pretty quickly. And once we finished our task, it was very sad, but they let me go. They did offer me like a different position for cultivating, working with the plants in the grow, but I didn't really want to go that route. So I went into the regulatory side of the cannabis industry, and I worked at a cannabis testing facility. So I did the quality control on all the products before it hit the market. So I was between the producers and the consumers, and then I was working hand in hand with the CDPHE. And during that job, I did a lot of consulting work. So when people would fail their QC, they would, not know what they were doing wrong. So I got to go explore all these different grow facilities throughout Colorado. And that was an eye-opening experience. I got to see the scale of like what like industrial farming looked like, and it really excited me. So I did that for a few years, and I saved up a bunch of money. I collected all this lab equipment, and then in June 2018, that's when I launched Fresh from the Farm Fungi. And so the other company that I worked for was also a startup. So I got a lot of experience kind of seeing companies grow from the very beginning, which I'm super grateful for, because that kind of prepared me for my journey for growing mushrooms. And then somewhere in between that, just one summer, I remember I was like, all right, well, I have this vegetable garden. I want to try growing some mushrooms just because, I like cooking, and it was interesting just to see, the I guess diversity, or it was just completely different from growing any other plants that I'd grown before. So I'm a big cannabis cultivator, and I had some of the equipment for, hydroponic stuff, and it kind of fit in there. And my first attempt for growing mushrooms, I got like this seed pack off of Amazon. It was like a little spawn that was like, a tiny little dime bag of 4 oats and some mycelium. So I just dumped it into a tote, and it was a complete failure. So I just doubled down and, studied a lot about how to grow mushrooms. And that was probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, because I was at my first house in Aurora, and then I had a couple batches, just go terribly wrong. And then one of my dad's friends from his work, her husband had been growing mushrooms for over a decade in Niagara Falls. So shout out to Anthony at Niagara Falls Mushrooms. And he was so kind to walk me through the whole process over the phone. So I would call him up randomly, be like, hey, this went wrong. What am I doing wrong? And he was so patient and kind to me that he inspired me to start teaching about mushrooms. But it was just weird how it happened. So anyway, I went and visited his farm one Thanksgiving, and he walked me through everything. And they had 2 mushroom houses, and it was just him and his wife and one other person. And they were producing about 1,000 pounds a week during peak season. So that right there inspired me, like, all right, well, I can just do this with very little people, and it's a pretty high value crop, and I really enjoyed it. So after I saw his farm, I came back here. I bought a bunch of cultures, and he gave me some of his cultures too. And that was kind of the launch point from when it went from just a hobby gardening in my backyard to, okay, I'm going to try to make this a little bit more of a production. So at that time, I believe I still had my other job, and I had acquired like a autoclave, a really small autoclave. And I had all the equipment from when I was cultivating cannabis. So I just threw a couple sawdust bags that I made myself. I sterilized it. I grew some oyster mushrooms, and my wife, she found on Craigslist, this person had bought in a kit, and they gave up on it. They're like, all right, this isn't producing any mushrooms. I'm going to leave it on my porch. So I went there, or actually she went there at like 8 p.m. at night, brought this mushroom block back, and I cloned the mycelium onto an agar dish. And then I went through the whole process from that. And that was, I think, my first fruiting was just from this random kit off of Craigslist. So that was kind of cool. And then I really quickly after that, I fruited some lion's mane mushroom. And then we had some different oyster mushrooms and some shiitake. And quickly it grew from like, I just had a block in this little 4x4 tent to half of my basement had a bunch of fruiting tents. And then we had so many mushrooms that we were just giving them away to our friends and family. And we had so many mushrooms that I posted an ad on Craigslist. I was like, yeah, we got some lion's mane mushroom. And this guy rode his bike all the way from Lakewood. So I'm in like Denver, Littleton border. So Lakewood, maybe, I don't know, like 3 or 4 miles away. But I remember this guy showing up at the door, and I had this basket of lion's mane, and he just grabbed one and ate it like an apple. So I was like, you're not supposed to do that. But at that moment in time, that was like when I realized, like, holy crap, there's like a market for this too. So shortly after that, I approached, the city of Denver, and I knew right then that I needed to get some sort of a certification or license to be able to sell this, because up until that point, I was just kind of giving it away, and then I just sold it on Craigslist. But then that was a huge hurdle. So I went to downtown Denver almost every day for like 2 weeks straight. And they were like, all right, well, you need like this drawing of the facility that you're going to grow the mushrooms at. I'm like, okay. So then I just drew it out, and then I'd bring it back to them, and they're like, okay, well, you have to have this and that in place. So it took a really long time. And then finally, I just, after being there every day for so long, they introduced me to this lady who helped me like really dial all my paperwork in, and she was going to retire soon. So she's like, just sign off on all of this. And then I obtained this permit. We had to like change some zoning for our housing. It was pretty crazy. But after that, I felt safe and secure, and then I went all in. So that was in 2018. And then the next year, we got into the farmers market at Cherry Creek. And we also started selling our mushrooms at a co-op, the co-op at First and Sheridan. So that was like my first taste into what it takes to have a consistent product week after week. So there's a lot of growing pains involved in that. But once again, my friend Anthony, he was there to help me like throughout all the ups and downs. And it took about a year or so to get that whole process down. And then 2 years later, here we are. We just purchased a property in Sedalia, and we're going to be moving down there shortly after the farmers markets are over. And then I hope to build out a larger warehouse, where my dream is to have farm tours and make it like a hub for mycology, and just have like seminars, and people can come visit and just create like this nucleus in one of the most peaceful places in Colorado, in my opinion. So that's kind of my whole story. Sorry if it was a little bit long, but that's my background and how things came to be.
So with mentioning, you're teaching people how to grow mushrooms and cultivate mushrooms now, and along the journey, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, you had some shortcomings. What are some of those things that people trip over when they're starting to grow mushrooms, or something that if Rich or I wanted to start, you might say, hey, make sure you watch out for this, or watch out for this, because this happens to a lot of people?
Yeah, so definitely the number one thing is contamination, specifically trichoderma. So all the batches that I had ended up getting overtaken by trichoderma, which it's an inert mold that is present in the air. So even like, every breath that you take might have a trace amount of spores, but the sterility involved in growing mushrooms is very important. And especially with cultivating cannabis in the same facility or at the same vicinity, there's a lot of trichoderma that comes in the soil and the humidity from that. So that was probably my biggest problem at first, was I had to just shut everything down, clean it, really hone in on my sterile aseptic technique. And then the next important thing is just getting quality genetics. There's a lot of, bunk genetics, especially nowadays, that's starting to become really popular. If you don't get fresh or pure genetics, you're going to do one run and it's not going to work, and you're going to get really frustrated. So I think the two most important things are sterility or aseptic technique, and then high quality genetics. And then other than that, it's just patience. But coming from, growing tomatoes and growing corn and all these things that take a whole entire season, when you condense that down into 4 to 6 weeks with mushrooms, it's very exciting. So it's almost like a super hyper fast crop. But if you're not used to growing things, then it could be very boring, or it's hard to be patient when you're just watching this white blob like take over your substrate. So I would say those are the biggest challenges: is being clean, being patient, and then high quality genetics.
So how do you know what kind of genetics you're getting? What's the fool's test for that?
All right. Yeah. So it's really hard to tell up front. You have to, I've spent thousands of dollars just getting every different culture I've seen and then you figure out who's actually reputable. So one of the first sources was my mentor, so I knew that that was a reputable source. I have bred my own strains since then, though, because the elevation difference here in Colorado compared to New York, there's a difference between the oxygen levels and just the humidity. So breeding your own strains is going to be the best way to get high quality genetics, because you're going to select for the substrates that you're using, the environment that you're growing in, all those factors. But second to that, you want to have pure genetics. So the key to that is just quality control. So every batch that I produce of our cultures, we'll do the due diligence beforehand, and we'll test out the mycelium on agar dishes. So you can test it on a petri dish to make sure it's pure. And then moving forward from that, you just want to have rigorous and fast and high yielding genetics, just like any other crop. And that just comes down to reputation, and then just breeding over time. There's a like ATCC is like the American Tissue Culture Association. So they have like a cryo preservation of thousands and thousands of different genetics, and you can reach out to them, but you have to become like a certified ATCC member, and that costs money. And then you have to, go through their resources to figure out what mushrooms you want to grow from their genetic library. The other, I would say Mycelium Emporium, they're a pretty reputable brand, just a mom and pop like me. But they focus on just only maintaining their library. But when you start off, just make sure that you go to a reputable source, and that's just going to come with trial and error.
And having lived in both the cannabis world and now, with fungi and mycology, would you say cannabis is far more intensive and time consuming, other than maybe the cleanliness and the hygiene side of fungus? Would you say that one is more difficult than the other?
They're very, very symbiotic with each other. I would say they're very similar. I would not weigh one or over the other. Like I said, mushrooms are very fast, so you don't have much leeway. Like if you want to go on vacation or something, we recently just took a vacation this summer, and I had my friend Zach watching our blocks for us, where if I had, a cannabis setup, I could kind of automate everything and it would be okay. So the attention to detail for mushrooms is probably twice as time consuming. But then on the back end with cannabis, there's a big risk after you harvest it. You have to cure it properly. So I would say the back end on mushrooms is like just eat them or sell them right away. Like there's very short window compared to cannabis, where it's like now that you've grown it, there's this whole other art form of curing it. And then even further from there, all the secondary products like the hash and all the concentrates that are coming out nowadays, like the science is there, where mushrooms is it's a new frontier. There's not too much research that's been done. So that like the slate, the potential for the mushrooms is very great. And I don't even want to downplay cannabis, because the potential there is great as well, like as far as like manufacturing, textiles, all that stuff. I'm just a proponent of both, and I would say that both have their pros and cons. The plants can handle a little bit more, like as far as the trichoderma, like you can have stuff in the grow room that's not going to affect it, but with mushrooms it has to be almost sterile, very clean and fast, but then the back end is not as labor intensive. But I feel like there's going to be more opportunity for that in the future. But as far as currently for culinary mushrooms, it's a faster pace, I would say.
And so does it have to be until you get to the back end of mushrooms? Does it have to be sterile that whole time, or is it just like in the beginning process of like the inoculation and, you know, when it's going into the mycelium and that sort of stuff, or is it all the way until you're ready to pluck them?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that's debatable. But from my perspective, coming from a regulatory background, coming from, you know, clinical mycology, I treat everything as it has to be sterile. So I might be over the top for, you know, what some other growers might consider acceptable, but my philosophy is if I can prevent contamination at all these phases along the way and then implement systems that maintain that, that is going to be a cost that's avoided over the course of, you know, the lifetime that I'm doing this. So I have these super high standards where some people, they might get away with, you know, not as rigorous of a cleaning schedule, or there are some farms that do this outdoor, but then you have to deal with the bugs. So as far as my point of view, I think doing the due diligence up front is going to pay off over year after year after year. Whereas once you get contamination, it is very hard to get rid of it. So you're always battling it. And then it's going to be a matter of mitigation instead of prevention. So that's my philosophy is, you know, just be above and beyond as far as cleaning, air filtration, and never allow that to happen. And it's kind of like the problem of powdery mildew. I don't know if you've ever been in the cannabis industry, but that is like the bane of existence. Like if you have powdery mildew in your facility, you're always going to have to battle it. So coming from that side, I wanted to make sure that there would never be that type of issue. And that takes a lot of due diligence and constant innovation. I recently just bought some UV lights that are like hydroponic UV lights that I put in some of my air ducts and in my reservoir. And it's just a passive way to mitigate any other life forms. But it's kind of exciting. One of the things that I think could be, you know, this groundbreaking thing is utilizing mushrooms in space, like all these like top companies that are going into space now, and they're planning on going to Mars in these sterile vessels, like these sterile spaceships. I feel like mushrooms can withstand that environment where maybe plants wouldn't do so well. But that's just kind of my thoughts on sterility. Mushrooms can handle being the only organism present, where plants, they might benefit from a trichoderma or like even other fungus. Like, so I feel like fungus are more resilient in the fact that they can be the only organism present, where plants, they might be more symbiotic with other organisms. And I don't know, I feel like I could be wrong, but that's the philosophy that I use in my process and moving forward.
Right on. I appreciate that. It's always hear people talking about the sterility process and how that's usually the number one speed bump or roadblock that people encounter is that but it's also interesting to hear about the genetics. I didn't realize that genetics was, I guess you would say genetics is probably just as big as it is in the cannabis industry then, huh?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. It's more established though. And there's people with more reputations that, from the 90s back, you can recognize strains where, I mean, it's the same with mushrooms, but you have to do your research first. And it's just more of an open frontier, I would say. But I think that over the next 10 years and with the implementation of CRISPR, like CRISPR-Cas9, which is being used on bacteria and yeast, which is a fungus, the next step is to, introduce that technology into fungus. I feel like it's going to be easier to manipulate mycelium over plants. So there could be like a rapid innovation phase in mushrooms because of the genetic technology. But I also did tissue culture, and there's some CRISPR that's happening with plants as well for like producing more frost tolerant trees. I know there's some companies on the East Coast that are developing that. So I think that the next 10 years is really going to change urban agriculture, just really efficient farming. And that's debatable too. Like, what are the long-term consequences of changing these genetics? And I don't know. I'm all for science, but there's also has to be like this cautionary side behind all of that.
So a couple of things there. Pardon my ignorance for not knowing anything about CRISPR. So can you explain that a little bit more? And what are some of the potential dangers of mixing the wrong things, or like you just said, not having anyone kind of advising you? Well, what are some of the dangers? Like, are we talking like sci-fi type stuff? Like someone create like some kind of mutation or something like that? Like, how's that work?
Yeah, so it's all very new. There's tons of consequences that could happen that, anything is possible. So I'll start off by saying that is like, I don't even know all the potential consequences, but basically CRISPR or CRISPR-Cas9, it's a tool that is used to modify the genome very specifically. So there's other methods of genetic modification, like for plasmids and bacteria. You can just pool these bacteria and then put in random chemicals and enzymes that kind of force random mutations. But CRISPR is an enzyme that they discovered in a bacteria that can specifically it splices regions of DNA. So if you have a primer and a probe and a specific sequence, you can do a chemical reaction, and it's very technical as far as creating these primers and probes. So it's there's like Sanger sequencing involved, which is a pretty new form of genetic sequencing, which can determine every single base pair in a sequence. So about 10 years ago, you could do genome sequencing, but it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. But Sanger sequencing is a very cheap method that is super accurate. So as the price of the sequencing comes down, the specificity of the tool or the CRISPR enzyme is also improving. So it's pretty rough right now, as like probably hundreds of base pairs where you can splice in a specific like a sequence, which there's really not that much data on it. It's growing every day. So there's a few I had been studying some like public data banks. Let me pull this up. But there's a few companies. GenBank and Mushroom Observer, they're open source libraries basically. So you can send out your DNA after it's extracted, and they're creating these genetic banks. And by doing that, the computer can kind of sequence, or it will take all these sequences and put them in an order, and then you can look at sections of those genomes and what's the differences between those. And then you can use CRISPR to cut out specific segments, insert a segment that you have created in a lab, and then kind of grow it out, see what happens. So that is my understanding right now. It's pretty rudimentary. They've been doing it for 10 or 15 years on different plants. I feel like it's just trial and error though. So all of these organisms that are being grown out are pretty controlled. But I know that about 2 years ago there was a company in Pennsylvania that was the first CRISPR modified mushroom. It was an agaricus species, and they took out the gene that made it bruise. So it extended the shelf life of these button mushrooms for like 3 weeks, which is crazy. That being said, who knows what the consequences of that are? It's just going to not degrade as quickly, but I don't know. From a business standpoint, that is huge, because that gives you 3 more weeks to distribute your mushrooms. So that's more people that can eat it. I believe that they did tests on the the nutritional compounds, and I feel like it was stable, but I'm not sure. I haven't followed up on that. That was about 2 years ago that I read that. But it would be interesting to see, what other studies have come out since then. But it's fairly new technology. There's a company called Mini Ion, I believe, in London, that they're making like these handheld sequencers. So the technology, the cost is coming way down, and it's just starting to hit the market. I would think of it as the first automobile, what it was to have a Model T way back in the early 1900s to where it is now. Like, the growth of that is going to occur over the next decade. I hope that explains everything.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And thank you for dumbing it down so I can understand a little bit. And you mentioned, you studying. How often are you studying? Or is it constant, like daily, constant, like you're in college for mushrooms pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, you can ask my wife. I always have my ear pods in when I'm doing my like busy work, I call it. But I would say I'm studying probably 10 to 12 hours a week, just mycology. A lot of it nowadays is just like podcasts and audio listening. And I do have a couple books that I'm reading now that I really like. Hold on, I'll show you. So these are my 2 favorite books right now. So I just finished this In Search of Mycotopia by Doug Behrend, and this came out in February. It's kind of a good overview of the industry and like what segments and are popping up in mycology. So he kind of visits a few different mushroom farms and different textile facilities, and he talks about psychedelics and some of the forefront studies that are happening there. And then also Merlin, Sheldrake, and Tangled Life. I recently started this one, and it's a really good book as well. So I don't know. I just read whenever I have the chance, and if not reading, then I'm listening to a podcast or just consuming information. And then as far as the scientific articles, I'll just kind of, when people ask me questions and I don't know the answer, I'll just research. There's a website called scihub.net, I believe it's called, but you can gain access to all the public articles, and they're coming out regularly. So there's a lot of research coming from China, especially with different mushroom cultivation. So they're about 5 or 6 years ahead of anything I've seen in the US, but that could just because people are more private with the R&D here. But yeah, I would say I'm constantly learning, just constantly doing experiments myself. So a majority of my time over the winter, I like to breed new strains and do different experiments. And probably 90% of those are failure. But then once I do get a really good strain, I can plug that into the mix and then focus on the next weakest strain. So that's it's just a constant battle and improving every day. So yeah.
Is that something similar with the cannabis industry, where you can take, one strain and then another one, and that's kind of where you get like Chem Dog times OG Kush? Can you do the same sort of thing with like a lion's mane and a cordyceps, or is that just too Frankenstein?
Yeah, so it depends. There is a hybrid that I'm growing, which is a hybrid between Pleurotus austriatus and a Pleurotus aringi. So a king oyster and a blue oyster created this black pearl king oyster. So that's kind of rare though. Mostly, a Cordyceps, which is an ascomycete, and lion's mane is a basidiomycete. So those are completely different phylogenies. But I believe that with the implementation of CRISPR, you might be able to splice some of those genes, fit them into a lion's mane gene, and then maybe get some lion's mane that produces cordycepin. I feel like it's there's less of a shell to break through, but the precision of taking those genes and splicing them isn't quite there yet, at least from my understanding. I'm sure there's people out there that are already doing it. But to have the precision and the tools to do that is still a little bit ways off. But I like to just inform myself, so when we get to that point, we'll be able to do it. As far as the breeding with cannabis, that is also, it's changed over the past 10 years or so. That there's now feminized seeds, so you can use colloidal silver and spray it onto the female flower, and that way you don't get male plants when you're doing your breeding. So there's technologies with the cannabis that have really helped cut out the risk for, I guess hermaphrodites and stuff. But the process for breeding cannabis is way slower than the process for breeding mushrooms. But cannabis has been around, at least here in Colorado, for a lot longer. So they have the head start, but I feel like the mushroom genetics will slowly catch up, and then probably the technology is going to be introduced at the same time. So I don't know. I can't even predict what it will look like in the future, but it's kind of exciting, especially from a scientific standpoint. I just think that cannabis has a head start, and then mushrooms, it probably will be faster and easier to breed.
Right on. And so, when we first got on, you were talking about, your specialty is gourmet mushrooms, and then you also hear a lot of in the sports performance or athletic performance. You hear a lot about the medicinal benefits, and then you also hear of adaptogens. Are the three kind of one and the same? Are there Or are there like adaptogen or medicinal mushrooms that you necessarily wouldn't want to eat for flavor?
Yeah, so to me, culinary mushrooms are medicinal as far as just eating them. Every mushroom has beta glucans, which are blood sugar modulators. And then they're just nutritional. So I think of them as like nature's vitamins. They're taking all these different substrates like wood, soil, all the debris that's fallen to the forest floor, and they're just condensing them into this tiny little fruiting body that looks delicious to people. So eating that is like eating a fruit that's highly nutritious. But that being said, there are other mushrooms like cordyceps, which I don't think cordyceps, like you're not going to eat a meal of that, but the potency of the cordyceps mushrooms, like those take 6 months sometimes to grow. So the time invested into that tiny little fruit is exponentially more nutritious. And then reishi mushrooms and turkey tail, they're all the same. So they're very slow growing. They produce very unique compounds, like even penicillium, which is a mold, produced penicillin, which we can ingest in our bodies, and that helps fight disease. So it's very specific, but it's also kind of like a broad spectrum healthy food. So I'm just a believer in eating whole foods. Like I have a vegetable garden where right now we're just eating tons and tons of tomatoes, and I know exactly, like I watched the bee land on that flower, and I fed the soil with our own compost, so I know exactly where that food is coming from. And I feel like that is very important for nutrition, just to know your farmer, know where your food is coming from. But then in today's society, like it is convenient to go to a grocery store and buy some, pre-packaged food that is treated with different chemicals. And I also eat that too, but there's a balance between your time and your future health. So I like to just weigh that, like you can't eat only junk food, but I would prefer to eat only natural food. But then the demands of today's world, you have to find a balance. So that's how I look at it. But then as far as other natural medicines, like I'm big proponent of cannabis and other adaptogenic plants. And I feel like Western society is not focused enough on the natural medicines, but I feel like it's coming to the forefront. So that's what I would say. It's like it's going to be up to the individual to do their own research, to understand the potential. But when I see the same customers coming back week after week, I know that I'm doing a good service, that at least some portion of what they're eating is this natural, healthy mushroom.
And two things to piggyback off of that. Do you have a favorite that you like to cook? And is that the same as the one that you would say is the most nutrient dense, or which is the most nutrient dense if they're not the same?
Yeah, so my favorite, I always change my favorite mushroom. I don't know, like right now I'm on a big Italian oyster kick. Like we put some in our sauces that we made. It's really like a savory mushroom. But earlier on, the boletes this year, the porcini, that is probably my favorite too, is just like the sweeter flavor of that wild mushroom. But I definitely just go through phases of what I like eating. But as far as the most healthy, I love Cordyceps and lion's mane. I made a tincture a couple, almost like 2 months ago now, and I'm having that tested. So it's a 14-month process to test all the different compounds and how stable they are on the shelf at room temperature. But I feel like taking those mushrooms and concentrating the compounds, almost like a cannabis concentrate, is going to be the future for the medicinal mushrooms. And actually has reishi as well. My friend Zach, he mostly grows reishi, and that is a very medicinal mushroom too. But as far as healthiest mushrooms, lion's mane, shiitake are really healthy too. They have a compound, it's a lentinan, and that's supposed to be really good for your heart. So I eat, quite a bit of shiitake, and those are really good too, as far as like soup stocks go. So I don't know, I guess I don't really differentiate between medicinal mushrooms and culinary mushrooms, except probably for cordyceps and reishi, because you can't eat reishi, it's too like woody and tough. But I'm sure someone could figure out a product where it would taste good. I think the market is wide open, to be honest. If someone can figure out how to make reishi taste good and edible, then all the power to them. It would be a good win-win.
Right on. I didn't know that reishi wasn't something you would want to cook with.
Yeah, I make broth and tea and tinctures out of it. Yeah. You can eat like the little tiny tips when they're soft, but I've tried like eating like a big conch before, and you just can't eat it. It's like, it's just inedible. It's too tough.
And with your tinctures, are you doing alcohol extraction?
Yep, a dual extraction. So alcohol, and then the same volume of fresh mushrooms. I did a water. So I boiled it in water, and then I took the same amount and did an alcohol extraction. And I'm still figuring out the best way, but I just thought, why not start with that?
Cool. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. So prior to this summer, I feel like my mushroom experience has as far as edible, has been shiitake and portobello. And you've opened my eyes to, I believe it's chestnut. I'm on a lobster mushroom.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those ones too. Yeah,
those are unbelievable. They just mesmerize me how much it tastes like lobster. It is unbelievable, and I'm like, I don't know why every vegan isn't just eating lobster mushrooms, because that.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, so my wife, she is not a big seafood person, but she will eat those on occasion. I've heard of one of our customers made sushi rolls out of it, so that was pretty crazy. But people are definitely getting creative, and I just think the education isn't there. But yeah, those lobster mushrooms are very cool. It's a russula, so it's a mushroom that is actually encapsulated by another fungus. So that is why they're so dense and brittle, and they're just rare as far as the seasonal aspect of them. But they're definitely one of our more popular ones. The chanterelles too; those are popping really nice right now, and those have like a sweeter flavor. So I'm big into the sweeter mushrooms. Piapino, they have the nutty flavor like the chestnuts. And then we started growing Namiko mushrooms, which I haven't fruited any yet, but those are in the same family as the chestnuts and the Piapino. So there's so many mushrooms that I haven't even grown yet that are on the list. So my goal is just to have as many as possible on the menu at all times, and just let people explore their their taste buds and the textures. And I guess next level would be breaking down the different nutritional components, because I think that that's on the horizon as well.
And the lobsters and the chanterelles, right? Those are wild, right? Those are foraged.
Yep. So those are wild forage. We work with certified foragers that they've been doing it since the 80s. So they know all their spots. And I've done foraging for myself, and I've gone out with Enzo Farm and Forage in Boulder, Colorado. So shout out to Michael Heim. He's super knowledgeable and he knows all the spots. But yeah, so one of my goals with this new property that we have is to take some of those mushrooms that are in the wild and just inoculate them all over the property. I've got a few spots picked out, and just creating like this microclimate of wild mushrooms, which there's, a few papers with some success. People have done it with truffles. So that's a really prized mushroom that grows with oaks in the roots. And it just takes a long time to establish this like macro network with the roots of the trees, which is why you just can't grow it in a small scale indoor. But I feel like that's on the horizon. The morel mushrooms, which everyone loves, they're more polymorphic, so they can grow mycorrhizal, they can grow saprophytic. So mycorrhizal means with the roots of the trees, saprophytic means on the dead wood. And I feel like the morels, they're figuring out how to kind of juggle that. There's a company called Blues Best, which they're sending me a few grow kits that I'm going to try out in the backyard here. But it's all relatively new within, the past few years where they're figuring this out. And it's the symbiosis between the health of the tree, the mycelium in the ground, and also you can think of the mycelium as like a shepherd of these bacteria. So they have enzymes that mitigate some bacteria and promote other bacteria. And this helps to establish this perfect ecosystem where they can fruit mushrooms. So it could take, years for the mycelium to work its way and get rid of the bacteria that they don't want, and then promote the growth of these other bacteria. And it's very complicated. I don't even, understand a fraction of what those ecosystems are, but, I'm doing my best to try to understand it. And that's kind of my goal, is to create this utopia or mycotopia where, I can have like different tours, and this is the chanterelle patch, this is the morel patch. But as far as I know, it's pretty far off from that, but I think it can be done.
And is Colorado, in the grand scheme of things, I guess here in the United States, is Colorado a good place for foraging? Or, as you mentioned, with the altitude and the kind of the drier climate, are those sorts of things good or bad for mushrooms?
So I think it's awesome here. Being at the Telluride Mushroom Festival, and this past summer was just crazy. It was a big bumper year. So as far as wild mushrooms go, it's amazing, because it's just not as developed as the East Coast. The East Coast has its pros, though. It's more moist and just a deciduous forest compared to carnivorous or coniferous. So all the pine trees out here, there's not as much diversity as like some of the maple and oak forests on the East Coast. But that being said, I think that it's just as abundant. There's mushrooms wherever you step. So I think that it's just picking the right mushrooms and the right microclimates. You could be looking at a whole hillside, and then if there's like a little ravine where the water kind of trickles down, like that's the mushroom spot. But there could be just mycelium all through the soil, and then you only see the fruiting bodies in one area. But then with all the fires that are happening, the burn morels are coming out like more abundantly than ever. So it just goes through cycles. It's like anything else. There's going to be good years, there's going to be bad years. But then the beauty of cultivating them indoor is you just get consistent results. But I feel like, protecting the ecosystem is one of our main goals too. So it's hard to say, but I think, I've only been alive for 32 years, but talking to some of the older people, they seem to think that it was way more abundant, 50 years ago, but it could be cyclical, or climate change could be having a negative impact, which is even more of a reason to try to preserve all of these species.
Yeah. Is there, is each kind of region unique in itself for foraging in terms of different species and stuff? Or is, I've heard people talk about the Pacific Northwest, because of the moisture there. So is it all kind of unique depending on where you're at, or is there one place in the United States that's like, that's the spot, like the Mecca?
Yeah, definitely Pacific Northwest is one of the Meccas. Pennsylvania, like Punnett Square, Pennsylvania is a pretty good area. New York, upstate New York. Colorado, though, is up there, especially in the mountains. So it depends on the time of the year, but basically you can chase the elevation as the temperatures change throughout the summer. You can kind of chase that elevation. So that's pretty unique to Colorado. But there's even mushrooms in, Nevada, which is very surprising, or in the roughest parts of Florida, like you can still find mushrooms. So, but yeah, Pacific Northwest, probably it's just a beautiful region, and there's the redwood forest out there. Yeah, I would say every region has its own diversity, and there are some mushrooms that are present everywhere too. So it's hard to pinpoint what's the best region, but I would love for Colorado to be up there, and it already is, but I feel like as this industry evolves, I would love for Denver to be like the nucleus, or one of the nucleuses in the United States. And it's definitely, made a name for itself with like the freedom aspects and the whole psilocybin being decriminalized. That's gained a lot of attention. And then just protecting the forests here. Like a lot of people here are very environmentally conscious, and that's going to be important moving forward.
You had mentioned, psilocybin, and I believe it was 2019, there was decriminalization. How has that changed the industry, especially here in Denver? Has there been people kind of getting in because they think that might become legalized, or, medical stuff? How have you seen that change?
Yeah, it's definitely gained a lot of attention, but it's moving forward in other parts of the country, like Oakland. Oakland had the psilocybin cup. So that is, really important for the industry, just getting real scientific testing, and, it's bolstering the industry. I would say a lot of people always ask me at the farmer's market, like, oh, are these psychedelic mushrooms? So, I mean, the attention is there. I'm all for people's freedom, and I feel like it's just gonna move forward from here. But the next levels are going to be decriminalization statewide, possibly like a medical infrastructure, like how they did for cannabis. But I feel like learning from all the mistakes from that industry, improving upon that model, it's going to be even better. And everyone should have the abilities to just grow their own medicine and grow what they want. So freedom and education. I'm a really big proponent on just teaching people how to grow mushrooms, because I don't think it's that hard, but it opens your eyes to the whole realm of mushrooms. And if people are more aware, then they're going to be more cautious about, you know, the ecological impacts, and that's going to help sustain the wild mushrooms, and it's just going to create a better ecosystem for everyone. So I feel like, you know, um, the mental health side of things is going to be important too, especially after all this, chaos and whatever's happening in recent times. I think mental health is very important. And, I would love to do what I can to provide, an outlet for mental health. And right now, just growing mushrooms is a very, calming. It's a very rewarding. It's a cool project that takes your mind off of some of the negativity of the world today, and it helps out, the world and your environment. And if you grow mushrooms in your garden, the plants are going to benefit. And if you eat the mushrooms that you grow, you're going to be healthier. So I'm just all for mushrooms in whatever way possible. I think that moving the industry forward a step every single day or over time, it's just going to benefit everyone.
Yeah, I just saw yesterday, the day before, maybe the FDA just approved a study that is going to involve psilocybin use for people who are trying to quit smoking.
Wow.
Yeah, that one just popped up yesterday, the day before. I don't know the specifics of it, but it was like the first time in, I don't know, however many decades that they approved the research and the studies to be done to see if there's a correlation between psilocybin use and getting people to kick nicotine or tobacco habits.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely helps bring awareness to what you're putting into your body, what you're fueling your body, just protecting, the temple that is your body, and just having awareness and, the self reflection that comes after using that. And I feel like it's just empowering people. And, with all the distractions today, and like I said, all the negativity, I think that having an outlet and just, the mindfulness to think and sit still and like make good choices, decide what you want to put into your body, and, how can you be the healthiest person, which is it's not only going to affect you, but it's going to affect the people around you. And then you extrapolate that, and it creates a healthier community, and then that is going to create a healthier planet ultimately. So it just starts small, and then it grows out from there, and then it just keeps growing. And it's just like mushrooms, the mycelium will spread, but the healthy ideas will spread, and that's all we can do is just keep spreading the word.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be the change, and when everybody does better, everybody does better. So you're speaking our language 100% with everything you're saying there, in terms of taking the time to kind of just chill out and reflect, and you work on yourself, you do good yourself, you put good things into your body, and then that's going to come out to your external, and you're going to, in some way, shape, or form, rub that off onto other people, and then spread it from there. So we love all that.
Absolutely.
Do you grow hops in your garden? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So it's my second year. I just harvested like 4 or 5 big, like 10-pound sacks that I freeze dried. So I'm sitting on a bunch of freeze dried hops, but I've never brewed beer before or anything, but it's always been on the list. I just I don't know. I mostly did it for the beauty and the privacy. It's cool to, it covers like our lattice. I just built this deck last year and it was missing something. So the hops fit right in. And yeah, I have a bunch. I just don't know what to do with it.
Right on. I was wondering if there was going to be a some sort of mushroom infused IPA or something.
I would love that. I just I don't have the time right now.
Yeah.
Are you a beer drinker?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right
Yeah.
on.
What do you prefer? What's your beer choice?
I like the IPAs. So I'm a big I don't know, I like double IPAs. Just like really hoppy. Voodoo Ranger that's one of my favorite go-tos, or the Breckenridge Brewery here in Littleton. But I'm pretty open, pretty open to anything. One year we went to the Telluride Mushroom Festival. They did have a Rishi beer, and then they also had a Cordyceps lager, which was phenomenal. But yeah, that was a few years back, and there's still no mushroom beers on the shelves. So I think a Cordyceps would be phenomenal. Like a Cordyceps lager, it just fit well, and you have a couple of those, and your night is pretty energized.
Yeah, I would imagine so. It's kind of like a natural Four Loko.
Yeah. Oh man, those are crazy.
I do have one other question about the Cordyceps.
Mm-hmm.
The kind that you have, and I'm assuming that's the typical kind that people get when they get their supplements. It's the starts with an M.
Yep. Oh yeah. So Cordyceps militaris.
Militaris, yeah.
And then there is a Cordyceps sinensis, which that is a species that grows on silkworms.
Right.
And as far as I know, no one's cultivating that one. And you can find it in Tibet or other regions of China, I guess, where the Cordyceps militaris is more common. So it's wild in America. I don't know if anyone's found it in Colorado, although that would be pretty cool to grow a local strain. But I cultivate it on rice. I've recently done some birdseed runs. I'm still trying to dial that in. So I would not consider myself an expert, but like I said, more of like a hobbyist grower. I have had success. It's just very finicky and slow, but typically it grows on insects. So it will land on the insect, colonize it, and then it tricks the bug to go up the tree or on the underside of a leaf, and it will fruit and then spread the spores like that. So it almost hijacks the insect. I think there's like a video game that was based on that principle, but it's a pretty remarkable organism. And like I said, I got interested because of the entomopathogenic aspects of it, which that's a mushroom that eats insects. So it's pretty crazy.
And so the militaris, is that originally come from the insect
Yep.
parasite? Okay.
Yep. So then they just figured out that if you mimic all the nutrients on an insect, it can grow. I don't know why the sinensis won't take on rice. I have a strain of it in culture, but it just doesn't seem to grow. But yeah, so the militaris naturally from insects as well, but it's kind of been manipulated and they can grow it on rice. And I've also grown it on birdseed, and there's a few recipes where you can use like eggs, so the protein and calcium carbonate, and I think like tryptase soy. Like it just requires a very specific nutrients that they figured out, which maybe in the future they'll do sinensis. But I feel like the cordycepin is very similar. That's the active ingredient. I don't know what other compounds would be present in a wild one compared to a cultivated one. All that stuff is still, on the forefront. But I would love to take my cordyceps and get it tested and then see, all right, what are the other compounds that are present? And then you can breed for those compounds instead of right now people are just breeding for the bigger, better mushrooms. And, that might not be more effective, but, you get more volume. So I feel like there's a need for specific chemistry analysis, which it's happening. There is a lab in Denver that is, they've reached out to me a couple times now, and they're setting it up for cordyceps and lion's mane testing. So I'll definitely get my stuff tested as soon as they're up and running. And then that place in Oakland that they're doing the psilocybin testing, I think that they are also going to be doing cordycepin, but I don't want to speak for them, but I feel like it's coming down the pipeline, and I think that it would be very interesting to see, the differences between what strains people are growing. I've bred my own strains in house, which is pretty time consuming, and one of the difficult parts about cordyceps is it senesces or it degrades very quickly, which in the wild, that kind of makes sense because insects are pretty short-lived. So it kind of grows, fizzles out, breeds very rapidly. But the downside in when you're cultivating it is it will get mutations pretty rapidly, or it will just stop fruiting randomly. So you have to constantly be breeding new strains, where with typical mushrooms like oyster mushrooms and whatnot, you can keep replicating and it's going to be more stable. So that's another difficulty with the cordyceps is it's constantly mutating and rapidly it's just has a very, very susceptible morphology.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Are you a coffee drinker?
Yep.
How do you drink your coffee? How do you brew your coffee? How do you take it?
So I use a Keurig, and I drink it either black or with some creamer in it. Right. And then I also add cordyceps and tincture, but sometimes I just take tincture by itself, and sometimes I drink cordyceps with water. So I'm a pretty regular coffee drinker, and then I like to supplement either with tinctures or fresh or freeze-dried mushrooms. So it kind of just depends on my mood.
Is that like a lion's mane reishi tincture?
Yeah. Yep. I've got that tincture on my counter, and then I also have a bag of freeze-dried, and then I also have fresh mushrooms pretty much all the time. So
right on.
Yep.
Gary, do you have any daily practices or daily rituals that you do on a regular, consistent basis to help you level up and show up as the strongest version of yourself every day?
Yeah. So the first thing my wife and I do every single day, we do a 30-minute workout. So I recently just got like a G2 Life Fitness machine. So I've made that part of my ritual every single morning. And then right when we're done with that, that's when I brew my coffee, and then we go for a 1 mile walk. So we've done that every single day for 6 weeks straight. That's, pretty important part of my life. We've gotten away from it in the, past a few times, but every time we come back to that, that is how we, center ourselves and just, we make that time a priority. So it sets the mood for the rest of the day. And we do that every day except for Saturdays, which is farmers market.
Right on. Well, congratulations on that 6 weeks, keeping that going. I know how important that is. That's how we roll. Got to get it done first thing in the morning to get the day going, but it makes everything else easier. So respect on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been tough, but we made it a very important priority now. And we're going to stick to it.
Sweet.
Nice. What are you listening to right now? Podcasts, music, audiobooks? I know you said you were reading some books.
Yep. Yeah. So right now I've got my Audible. So I'm reading a book called 100 Ways to Create Wealth. So I do some, um, and then I've got Tools of the Titans by Tim Ferriss. Really good book. So I do a lot of self-help books, but then I also am reading this Entangled Life. So I do, my mushroom reads, and then I also like to listen to Micropreneur podcast. So they've got a really good one coming up with Mushroom Hour. So it's another mushroom podcast. Some of my favorite people. And then I like Joe Rogan. So whenever he gets a good guest, I'll listen to that. I like Tim Ferriss. And then also I listen to a lot of YouTube, just like inspirational videos, or I'll listen to just like calming music. Like I like some of the meditation guides, or like at nighttime, we like to put on like yoga music and then just zone out to that. And then once it hits like winter, I like to just listen to like some rock music and go snowboarding. So I got a pass this winter. Last winter I didn't get a pass, but got the Epic Pass again, and I like to get out there once a week and just jam out to whatever music I like.
Where do you go snowboarding?
So I've got the Keystone, Breckenridge, Epic local, but I like to do A Basin, Winter Park. Those are probably my top 4.
Nice.
Right on.
Yep.
Did you go up skiing or snowboarding on the East Coast?
Yeah. So that's where I grew up, and I used to go to Holiday Valley and Kissing Bridge, and that was just like a sheet of ice. So I don't think I could ever go back to that.
That's why I always say, if you grew up skiing on the East Coast, you could ski anywhere, because if you could ski on ice, your legs might be a little sore from being in knee deep powder, but it's way better than falling on sheets of ice.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
We used to go. There was a place called Scotch Valley, and then it became Deer Run, and then our aunt had a place right down the road from Plattekill. And we also spent some time at Hunter, but then did a bunch of stuff in Vermont too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Just a bunch of ice out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Last but certainly not least, this used to have a much more fun, joking, jovial kind of vibe to it, before March of 2020. Now it's taken a little bit different turn. But if ever, when you're not spending time with your wife or working with the mycology, do you ever find yourself in a rabbit hole, a YouTube rabbit hole? Maybe, do you believe in Bigfoot? Have you seen aliens? Do you have a favorite conspiracy theory, Gary?
Oh, well, I'm pretty open-minded to all that. Yeah, I mean, I'm super into all of that. Like, I like the paranormal stuff. I used to live in this old house in Buffalo. So my wife and I, she was my girlfriend at the time, and we lived in the 3rd story, like little attic. And then we would have to walk down these stairs into the basement, where it used to be like, old like servant quarters, and we have some creepy stories from that. So like I feel like anything's possible, and I'm pretty open-minded. As far as Bigfoot, I don't know. I'm not going to discount it. I've never seen Bigfoot. And then aliens, I'm a believer. I'm pretty I'm conflicted between if aliens are humans from the future that are returning back. I think that there's a possibility that civilization could have been, completely advanced in technology, and then we had a catastrophic event, and then everyone died except for a few hundred people, and then we repopulated, and here we are. There's that theory that kind of floats around in my head. And then also just beings from another planet. Like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So I feel like anything's possible. Yeah.
All right, on. Have you ever heard of Tataria?
No, what is that?
It's
So
a wormhole. That's what it
it's a
is.
rabbit hole for sure, but it kind of goes along with your comment of, at some point in time there was a far more technologically advanced civilization that inhabited this planet and created buildings like the pyramid, or some of the different cathedrals and capitol buildings that you see not only around the country but around the world, that very similar architecture, but the timelines don't necessarily match up. There are people that theorize that there was this, and there's maps from the 16th century or whenever that show this Tataria on the map, but basically it was like a worldwide civilization that encompassed not only Europe and Russia, but also here in North America. And there was some sort of cataclysmic event, be it some people like to use the term mud flood, that kind of just wiped out this entire civilization. And then we are as Graham Hancock likes to say, we are now we are a civilization living with amnesia. And so we don't necessarily know what our history is, or more, as it seems, more and more people may not jive with what our kind of 9th, 10th, 11th grade kind of history books tell us about what history was. So it's fun to dig into that kind of, we are not the apex of humanity. There was probably something that existed before us. And, I posted a thing the other day. It was like a front end loader that was trying to move a block, and it was like the back wheels were like up in the air, but it was still like able to move the block. And it said something to the effect of like, modern education or whatever wants you to believe that 4 million of these blocks were carved, moved, and put in place every 2 to 4 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 25 years.
Yeah, that's the kind of things that I question. But what was the name of that? I want to
Tataria. It's a TARTIRA.
Cool. I'll have to do some research tonight. But I've been to Moab and seen some of those paintings, and that was, to me, that's what solidified, like, why, I don't know. You can, I'll have to do some research and get really really high and look into this.
Yeah, that's usually what we do.
Do you remember what episode Michelle was?
I don't, but we've had, like, some of our guests that we've had on have kind of specialized in this. One guest was her name is Michelle Gibson.
All right.
And she talks about how there's a lot of ley lines, and a lot of the pyramids and some of these other capitals and different buildings lay on these ley lines, and talking about the the sacred geometry that lines up, and also the kind of like the chakras of the earth, and how just a lot of these pyramids, or even like the Capitol buildings here in the United States, all kind of line up on particular ley lines and stuff. So that's super interesting to me. And I always have been a fan of architecture, so like be it the pyramids or some of the cathedrals in Europe, or even now, as you look into it, the Capitol buildings here in the United States, and even some of the high schools here in Denver, like Denver East, and the LaSalle, the church. It's just, it doesn't match up to me in terms of like the architecture and the timeline when they were said they were built. And my question is why are the roads still dirt?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with all these questions, and I don't know. It's something that maybe we'll find the answer to, but there's almost gonna always just be speculation, but it's worth I don't know, worth spending some time to just get the creative juices flowing. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up that question. I don't know, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah,
I
for
feel
sure.
like it's been a good way to distract ourselves in the past year from all the craziness in the world, like just thinking about lost civilizations and stuff like that. But that was episode 122 of Airey Bros Radio, if you want to check that out. And another gentleman that Rich looks into, it's John Levi, Levi, right?
Yeah, JONLEVI. He has a YouTube channel that is pretty good. Some of his I prefer some of the older stuff, but he's God bless you. He's he's in Utah, so he's done a lot of stuff and looking at like some of the stuff in Utah and Moab and some of the other stuff there. So it's pretty cool.
Cool.
Gary, thank you so much for your time tonight. You dropped so much knowledge on us and have been educating us all summer, to be quite honest with you. This is my first summer really diving into eating mushrooms on the regular, and finding you guys at the farmers market has completely changed up my kit and the way I look at my nutrition. And now I have something to add into it. You know, if I don't want to eat meat, I can eat mushrooms now. So I'm stoked on that.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on, and I appreciate you guys coming out to help support us, the farmers market. I'm glad to provide a really high quality product for you guys to eat.
Gary, one last thing too before we get you out of here. Where can the folks find you? Where do you want them to if they have questions, do you have any of that stuff set up? Or if they're here locally, I know we see you every Saturday at Cherry Creek. Are you got any courses or anything like coming up like that you might want to put it out there, let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah, so you could reach out to me on any of the social media. So it's Fresh from the Farm Fungi on Instagram, Facebook. We've got TikTok, YouTube, Indeed. I think I'm just Gary Heferle on there. But you can feel free to email me, or if you want to come talk in person, I'm at the Cherry Creek Farmers Market every Saturday from 9 to 2. I'll talk mushrooms all day, as you guys know. And then also we're doing some classes with my friend Zach from Mushroom Cult. So we've got 2 classes. One of them is in November and the other one's in December. There are only a few spots left. So we're going to be hopefully doing some more classes, but I'm in the middle of that move down to Sedalia. So just, stay tuned. We'll post more info on that. It's just a weird transition period. But we also do our mushrooms. We stock them up at the co-op at First on First and Sheridan. And then we also supply a food box program. It's called Grow Girl Organics out in Arvada. So every week they take our mushrooms, and you could sign up for their food box program. That's going to be ending soon, though, with all the crops are starting to, it's getting to the late season. So some of the other crops are ending, but we'll be there until October 30th. And then just feel free to reach out on any of those social media or email, or I think my phone number is on our website, freshfromthefarmfungi.com.
Sweet. Are those one-day courses?
2 days.
2 days.
We do online ones as well. It's we don't have any listed, but those are like a 4-hour crash course, and then it's a 2-day hands-on lecture. That's what's scheduled now, and we go through the whole thing, from everyone pouring their own petri dishes to making their own grain spawn to making bulk substrate, all the way through the process. And then you get to leave with this huge pile of everything that you made ready to fruit mushrooms. So it's been really cool to see some of our students like start their own mushroom businesses. We're starting to get people from all over the country, and I learn a lot and Zach learns a lot. And it's a really fun time to just spend 2 days just engulfed in mushrooms. And I'm looking really forward to that again this year. And then hopefully we get our place set up and we could do more classes in the spring, but it's just a little bit too far out to make plans for sure. But we're hoping that we'll get everything up and going for next spring. And then we look forward to bringing some more mushrooms to the market.
Sweet. Well, thanks for all of your information. It's a pleasure talking with you. We appreciate your time, and we will see you Saturday at the farmers market.
All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. And I guess my slogan is mush love. So mushrooms, love, and I'm gonna have to study some of these topics that you gave me. But I look forward to seeing you guys, and I enjoyed this conversation, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Sure.
Gary.
Thank
Have a
you
great
so much
night.
for your time.
All right,
Much
you
love.
too. Much love. Take care.